Good morning, good afternoon. It is, what is it? Almost 16 UTC here on Friday the 14th, going through some market updates specifically to Bitcoin. So the big things we have now coming in today, we have retail sales data coming in from the US. Abysmal, really low numbers, really missed the mark by far. Uh, Much worse than expected, bad for the dollar, good for the markets, and the markets are reacting relatively well off that data. Next week, since next week is Monday, we do have a U.S. holiday, so obviously very low liquidity or liquidity is going to be available. Lower volume is expected Monday across the board. We do have FOMC minutes Wednesday, some data coming out Thursday and Friday, but much less so than this current week. Going into Bitcoin specifically, so we have the long short ratio for Bitcoin coming in right now at about 62%. So still majority long, but there's been some aggressive shorting coming in since we hit almost 70%. Very similar to what we saw back on the 12th, with which saw massive shorts coming in after we hit about 70% on the long side. 65 to 70% is usually the max we usually get on the long side before we start seeing some type of major reversals. It's just market saturation. And at that point, you'd expect the majority of people to start smashing the red button if it reverses, which is what we're seeing right now. On the lower time frame, there is some more longing just because we've had a little bit of a drawback on the lower time frames, but in general, it's still quite high. To really change this, we need grinding upside price action to start trapping shorts as we potentially start gaining levels to go out of this. The trend is technically still down, and we'll go through the whole thing. Funding rates are neutral, nothing too crazy to say. BitMEX, which usually has a 0.01%, is an outlier with very low, almost neutral funding rates. And across the board, it's relatively neutral. All it tells me is that the higher time frame long and short order book, specifically the short side, has been successfully built back. On the liquidation side, so locally, we have seen some stuff building on either side, nothing too crazy. It's very low time frame. If I have a bit of a higher time frame outlook, let's say 2 week, it starts to get a bit more interesting when we talk about holding some levels or actually gaining some levels back. Most specifically, any new lows that start to fail 94.5, we should expect a deep sweep back towards 92 and 91.5. That being said, above us, I would say even 98K, it's quite thin. I would want to see a gain above 98.5. Anything above that, and we are actually trending back to the upside. We're actually changing the trend back up, where we have decent amounts of liquidity back to 100K and potentially back even to 102 and 104. On the liquidity side, looking at the resting order. So again, liquidations, these are where people are liquidated. Liquidity, this is where there's resting limit orders. If it's really close to the level, it might act as a magnet. If there's a lot of them, it'll act like, to pull the price in. If there's a lot of orders, it'll push it away. Right now, we're seeing some pretty interesting price action in the sense we've lost some local stuff. There's not really a whole lot stepping in above us, but 98K is still being heavily defended. It's got a big 220 Bitcoin short wall there, just on the Binance Perpetual side. Simultaneously, we've got a wall to the downside at 95K. We'll see how these hold over the weekend. I'm actually hoping for very little price action movement over the weekend. And in general, we still have a pretty decent amount at 94K, with plunge protection stepping in pretty aggressively below that to potentially hold the 90K lows. We still haven't done the trend reversal, and there's a lot of stuff to regain. Also, at 101 or 100.9K, massive short are still in place. This is going to continue holding price down. Watch to see if this big, what is that, 1300 Bitcoin short zone, and this is probably the same entity. If that gets pulled, likely it's a lot of pressure off of the resistance to the upside in the order book. And then finally, looking at the liquidity delta, nothing too crazy. It was looking pretty decent yesterday afternoon. Lots of long stepping in. We started making some higher lows, and we saw it both on spot and down here on perpetuals. What you really want to see is, for these types of reversals, good spot buying in general in a zone, and at the same time, a big perpetual push followed by a diminishing perpetual push, diverging, as the price regains levels go back up. So still looking relatively good. It's a bit of a mixed bag in the local structure, but beyond that, it looks fine. Going over to the charts. So looking at it from a 4-hour perspective, big indecision candle. We've effectively taken out quite a bit of liquidity on both sides. 0.7% is the 100x licks. So we got both sides. The high leverage liquidity has been taken out. We've done the retests of the weekly open in December. There is support here at 96.5. I would expect that if we do lose 96.5 now, we should come back down to the lows near 95.5, where we want to see really solid holds of level. It is untested, and it would be nice to see a big hold, especially over the weekend. Any loss of 95.5, and I think there's a high probability we go back to 93.5, but we're in a flat. So these are about $1,000 to $2,000 movements. Comparatively, we are not trending up. So how do we break out of this move? You're in a flat after trending down. We are not yet technically trending back to the upside, because from the low we've created, we have made a higher low potentially, but we haven't made a higher high, right? So even with what we did yesterday, we had the really beautiful short off of that structure for Thursday, early Thursday, that came down. We had another short that we talked about yesterday, which was failing from the high back to the lows. Got that again pretty perfectly. We haven't changed it, even though Ethereum and a couple other ones look like they're starting to trend back up. What we really want to see here is sustained price action, not just above 97.8, but realistically at 98.5. Anything that starts getting above the highs that we saw from Tuesday, this would constitute a higher high and confirm the higher low, which means we're now looking at trend change. So we want that to happen, because once that happens, yes, we'll probably still have a big retracement, but now we're starting to round bottom the whole structure. So that's the hope, at least. Until that happens, we're going into the weekend. Watch the weekend close really closely. The daily has been cancerous in this zone. It's been very much a scalper's dream, a trend trader's nightmare. What we don't want to see any loss of, 94.5, or below that, we have 93.5, which is going to be some key high time frame levels. What we really just don't want to see is those failures, because if we can do that over the weekend and close the week out above this, it doesn't look all too terrible. If we close the weekly out above the previous weekly, we can actually make the argument that we're gaining levels to potentially go back up to the local resistance. And like I said, 93.5, that yearly open, we don't want to close below 94.5 or 93.5, especially on the weekly, because then we have weekly potential failure. So hopefully we're a little bit optimistic. We'll see. We still want the price action to play in, to come into play until we see a definitive gain or definitive local loss. We're in a range. Play it as such, treat it as such, and I will catch you all next week. Have a good one.